I know these are some very strange times, so I really want to thank you for joining. I know everybody is dealing with a lot of uncertainty with possible health issues for yourself, for friends, for family, mental health, emotional health, physical health. So we really do hope that by coming together today, you can maybe learn some new tips, maybe it sparks some new ideas, and just hopefully that you walk away feeling like you're part of a community, and knowing that other people are struggling through some of the same challenges. And so this is the first session of the Better Careers Design Group learning community. Our topic is the challenge of staying connected, diversity plans, and phone calls that bridge the divide. We know you're all trying to figure out how to remotely connect with job seekers and the groups that influence their success. And in this webinar, we'll first present a 4-step process for developing a diverse list of people that you can go talk to, for example, former participants in a program that you're running, and hear more about their challenges, either with your workforce system or with the workforce development system more broadly. And second, in the webinar, we're going to cover how to make the most of Zoom phone calls or interviews with these folks. And so we are going to have a 1-hour webinar portion. That's the 10 to 11 a.m. portion. And then we'll have a Q&A portion from 11 to 11:30. So we hope you can stick around for that. And as you have questions, as we're going through things, please feel free to type them into the Q&A function, which you should see at the bottom of your Zoom, or just jot them down and we'll try to unmute you at that 11 a.m. time period. And also at 11, want to just open it up for some more discussion about specific challenges around community engagement that you might be having right now. I also wanted to note that we are recording the presentation section from 10 to 11 a.m. So don't feel like you need to, take copious amounts of notes on everything you see on the screen. So both the slides and the recording will be available afterwards. We will be shutting off the recording for the Q&A portion though, so that can be a little bit more conversational and that won't be posted anywhere. And so before we dive in, last but certainly not least, I want to give a big thank you to the James Irvine Foundation, who is funding this overall Better Careers Design Group, which includes this learning community. So with that, I'll introduce our team. I am Emily Fabiaschi. I go by Fabs. I've been at Third Sector for nearly 6 years. Third Sector has been around for about a decade, and we are focused on really centering the life outcomes and equity for people accessing social services. So we do this work by working with government agencies and with their service provider partners, often changing how they contract, changing how they work together and relate to one another. And we often use human-centered design tools in that work. I will be joined today by the rest of my team working on this project, my fabulous colleagues, Sheba Rivera, give a little wave, Drew Souders, Laura Chen, and Emily Rentschler. Thanks, guys. So just to do a little recap of what today will be all about, first we'll kick things off. Again, this is the very first learning community session for this project. And we also want to introduce new members to the project and celebrate them and highlight them. We are going to be showing you one method for choosing a diverse group of people to engage when you want to learn more about them, about the challenges and the specifics within your workforce program. And then we'll discuss a few ways to really make the most of that engagement, be it a phone interview, a Zoom call, some specific strategies you can use there. And finally, that is a lot to get through in the hour, but again, we do hope you'll stay for those extra 30 minutes from 11 to 11:30, where we can have more informal discussion and Q&A. So just wanted to go over a few principles for engagement. We like to do this at the beginning of all of our meetings. Everyone will be on mute for the 10 to 11 period, so I don't think we'll have any issues with listening with respect. But when it comes to that Q&A portion, feel free to speak up. We will be trying to take you off mute for that piece or using the chat or Q&A functionality. One other thing we like to always call out is this idea of literacy moments. So if one of us uses a term that you're unfamiliar with, please just type it into the chat box or the Q&A, type in the term and then literacy moment, and one of us will flag it and go back and explain what that term meant. We'll try to do our best not to use any acronyms or things like that, but we might slip up. So feel free to call out that literacy moment. And with all really tough challenges and systems change things, you won't always get a lack of closure. Everything won't always be, wrapped up in a nice bow. So we always say to expect and accept a lack of closure. And when we get to that Q&A portion, also don't feel like you have to get everything perfect. You need, an exactly nicely worded question. We want this to really be a space where you can work through stuff, brainstorm, doesn't have to be fully formed. All right, so who is in this learning community? The learning community is made up of government leaders, of nonprofit leaders, all working in workforce development, either at the local, the regional, or the state level. And so the overall goal of this entire Better Careers Design Group project is to help move California's low-wage workers into middle-wage work that has career advancement opportunities. And we see that, building relationships is a big piece of that. And so the sort of one prong of that is that we have 4 local teams going through this 18-month human-centered design curriculum focused on that outcome of getting people into middle wage work. And those 4 teams are Alameda County, Central Coast County, which is Santa Cruz County and Monterey County, Los Angeles County, and finally the Inland Empire team, which is Riverside and San Bernardino counties. And so those folks were chosen through a competitive process. Each team is made up of a mix of CBOs in the workforce development space, as well as local government agencies, such as a county social services department or a county probation department or a local workforce development board. So it's a nice mix of different organizations within each team. And then together, the 4 teams are going through this 18-month curriculum that began in January. And the hallmark is really quarterly, full day, in-person, immersive, interactive workshops where they get experience using different outcomes orientation principles, different human-centered design principles. For Q2, we can't do it in person. We're going to be doing it virtually. But we do hope to get back to those in-person workshops in the future. And then the teams are also receiving technical assistance from third sector every couple of weeks as they meet as a local team and try to do some applied activities. And a big piece of this work is going out and talking to community members, talking to what we call access seekers, people trying to get more access, trying to get into middle wage jobs, talking to people who are part of their workforce development system. So this sort of piece of community engagement is a really important focus of the 4 local teams right now. And you'll see that sort of tie into the topics that we're talking about today. And in human-centered design, we typically use half the time to think about the problem. So we're definitely still in the problem space, checking all of our biases, making sure we really understand what these challenges are for folks with the current workforce system in each of these places. And then we'll spend the second 9 months coming up with some solutions. And then we have our advisory committee, which is state level government agencies, thought leaders, private funders. There's about 13 organizations on the advisory committee. We thought it was very important that as we have things happening at the local level, it's tied into things that are happening at the state level so that there's sort of that back and forth. And then finally, we have this learning community space, which brings together the 2 groups that I just spoke about, the 4 local teams and the advisory committee. And it brings in lots of additional workforce innovators who we're really happy to have here. And we really hope that it can foster some connections between those different groups. Also, I'll just say that if we are able to get back to doing those in-person full day experiential workshops, there might be a possibility in the future that learning community members can apply to come to a workshop or two. So with that, I do just want to welcome all the new members. We had a few folks who were able to fill in a form online ahead of time. And so we have Alyssa Friedman from East Contra Costa, and you can see she's driven by the joy and pride she sees in job seekers when they succeed in training or careers, and is really interested in expanding the capacity for entry-level healthcare workforce training. So I'm sure that's a topic other folks might be interested in right now. We have Shayna Gross from San Diego, who sees employment as sort of that great equalizer across disparities and is dealing with that challenge that I think many people see of the mismatch of business needs and employee skills. And finally, Pamela Calloway from the East Bay, who has passion to serve, especially those with great needs, and is grappling with the challenge of finding greater mental health resources for people that she serves. And I believe Pamela is also joined by a colleague from the Bread Project, Veronica Barron. And then I know we have a whole bunch of other folks who weren't able to fill in the form ahead of time, which is absolutely okay. I know everybody has a lot of other stuff on their plate right now, but just wanted to give them a verbal shout out. And this is based on our invite. I'm not sure it's exactly right. So if I forget you, I'm very sorry, forgive me. Feel free to just type your name into the chat. And for any of you on the chat who want to answer these questions around what drives you or what challenges you're looking at right now, feel free to type those in. But I believe we also have Robin Freeman from Trinity County, Chad Bojorquez from Destination Home, Norman Albacence from Ventura County Workforce Development Board, Bishara Addison from Towards Employment, Sue Gallagher, who's a community member, Virginia Hamilton, also a community member, Stacy Hollingsworth from Apprenti, California, Becca Rosenbaum from JBS, Art Taylor from Job Train, Malet Mamo from Upwardly Global, Air Galagos from Canal Alliance, Tanya Proventure and Lisa Vincent from Yolo County. So again, just a very hearty, warm welcome to all the new folks. And again, feel free to chat everybody if I didn't call your name or if you want to answer these questions that you see on screen. Let me just check the chat box here. Great. So another piece of background that I just wanted to give everyone is around how we sort of came to this space of the learning community. We knew we wanted to do something that brought together the 4 local teams in the design group, the advisory committee, the state level folks, as well as other people who are really interested in these topics, who are workforce innovators. And so we conceived of this learning community with some workforce development innovators. We talked to more than 10 people and did an exploratory activity with them, really sort of delving into when you join a virtual learning community, how do you like to engage? What topics are most interesting to you from outcomes orientation or from human-centered design principles? And so the topics you see on the right-hand side of the slide are the result of those conversations. They're also a result of us trying to match what we're doing with the design group, with the 4 local teams and their 18-month curriculum. And you'll sort of see our high-level framework of that curriculum on the left. And so we're using a phased approach that we call Seek, Sketch, Structure, and Show, which is a little bit different maybe than some other human-centered design approaches you've heard, but it's probably quite similar in other ways. So we're kind of trying to map what we talk about in the learning community with that overall 18-month curriculum. And we're expecting to bring this learning community group together every 3 to 6 months. So if you have feedback on, the topics we covered today, on these potential learning community topics that are on this slide, again, you'll get the slide deck after, as well as a recording will go on our website in the next couple days. but we're always open to adjusting these. We try to take the design principles of kind of prototyping and refining things seriously. So if you do have ideas of other things you want to cover, please do let us know. But overall, we hope that you can just use this space to connect with others who might have similar challenges and dig into some meaty topics, maybe even hold some debates and really delve into things. So that is the entire introduction. With that, I want to pass it off to Emily to talk through our first main topic of one method for choosing a diverse group of people to engage.
Thanks, Fabs. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar names, and thank you for that great kickoff. I'm Emily Rentschler, and I apologize in advance for the confusion of the two Emilys. I'm the one that's probably been harassing you over email, so if that's helpful. To begin our learning community today, I'll be discussing some techniques on how to create a diverse list of people that you can talk to in order to learn more about your problem or local challenge that you're exploring. Diversity for design research has different goals and methods than other research and diversity practices that you may be familiar with or have used before. These techniques can be presented to whoever owns a list, for example, your data team, to help them understand who you want to engage for design research. This could be a list of participants in a program or a group of employers or partners that you might have. In the context of the challenges that you're trying to solve in your local system, using human-centered design, you first must make sure that the changes you want to make are the most informed, so you solve for the right problem. We refer to this as the problem space, and by staying in the problem space before moving on to your solution, you will hopefully design in a way that is more responsive to how your system works. And having a diverse subset of people to talk to helps explore what struggles people have instead of leaving it to when you find a few potential solutions and matching them together. The ideas you'll come up with will be more innovative and responsive. So on this slide, we're going to introduce a new concept about thinking about a diverse subset of people from a list before we talk about a guide to a diverse subset. The goal at the end of the day is to not be representative. You don't need a perfect breakdown of, for example, race and ethnicity or age of those who you serve or folks you're trying to engage. Instead, we aim to focus our learning on what it's like to be a person who has limited access or experiences extreme barriers rather than normative experience. So we're going to introduce this concept of an extreme user as someone who experiences extreme barriers. They all have the least level of access, but have different experiences or types of barriers. For example, an extreme user of a service might be a person who has limited access to the internet. This could be a younger person who might only have access variably via their cell phone, or a person who only has access to the internet at a public library. They both have very little access to internet, but their barriers are different. In this graph, you can see that as the x-axis, where the barriers might be different and the cases are not the same on each end. An example of that could be someone with a very high education level or someone with a very low education level, but they both face the extreme barrier of, for example, not having access to internet. Your extreme users might be successful in achieving outcomes you want to see, or they might not be successful. You want to listen to experiences of both cases and enabling conditions for either case. What has helped some people or hurt them in having better outcomes despite these extreme barriers. An average user might be someone who has great internet availability in their home on a computer. And the idea of this concept is that by designing for these extreme users, your new ideas or solutions will be more applicable for everyone that you talk to. And before I move on, Shiba, is there anything else you want to mention on this slide?
That says it all. Thank you for explaining that. I think this is a very complicated concept. So if we get into the Q&A and you want us to move back to the slide and talk more about it, we'll be more than happy to.
Thanks, Shiba. Great. So as we move on, we'll see a matrix. And so again, let's just keep in mind that idea of the extreme user, and it'll pop up as we go through these different techniques. So this is an example of a subset matrix. The two categories we use in this matrix are geographic location and employment outcomes. And while this doesn't come from Team LA, this is just an example of how an LA organization might choose to develop a randomized subset. In this case, we're assuming that former participant list is not larger than 1,000 people. So we need to limit our criteria in order to have enough people to fit in every box or intersectional category. As you keep coming up with more criteria, there are more intersections to create. So you'll need to find more people to fit that box. And say you want to add race, for example, if you're thinking about folks who are white, folks who are black, then you need to have double the amount of people to fill that category. So every time you're adding a new category, you're really opening up the number of folks that you'll need to interact with and talk with. If that former participant list isn't very large, you'll need to limit your criteria to just 1 or 2. Otherwise, you'll not have enough people to fit into that intersectional category, and the list of people will get smaller and smaller. And lastly, these are some guidelines to help you work with your data team so you can help pull data for your matrix. We understand that you won't be able to digest all steps in 5 minutes, which is why we're giving you all these guidelines to help pass over when you work with your data team. First, they'll want to know who to include. For example, folks who have graduated from the program in the last 3 years, or those who did not complete the program but were enrolled 3 years ago. They will also want to know who to exclude from a list, such as folks who are enrolled but don't have available contact information. They will also want to know categories. In the matrix on the previous slide, we used geographic characteristics and outcomes in the form of employment. You should use 2 or 3 categories that are key to help understand what the types of experiences and barriers you are exploring. You will need to develop a list that is 4 times larger than the number of people you intend to recruit. So if you want to have 30 interviews, you will need to have at least 120 people on your randomized set. As you mentioned when talking about extreme users, while your subset may not be representative of the whole group that you serve, it allows you to focus on the barriers that are affecting user experiences. And this isn't the only way to do outreach. There are many ways to find people to talk to, but if you do have access to quantitative data sets, you can create a randomized subset to make sure that you are not biasing outreach by only selecting certain people or only engaging with folks with low barriers of access. And Shiba, before we kind of move on to this tool, is there anything else you wanted to add to give a little more clarity?
Sure. So what we're focusing on here is a way that you can randomize your list. So this is useful at a time that you really want to make sure that you're not biasing the list of people that you speak to by those that you feel closest to or those that you know have great outcomes and leaving some people out. So this is a way to bring randomization into the process. And although we did not stratify our list by race or ethnicity, it's also something that you can do at the end. If your data owner or your data team can look at the list and look at the distribution of people on that list and make sure that you are still engaging people of different races, different ethnicities, and kind of do that check at the end.
Thanks, Shiva. And we know we talked about at the very beginning literacy moments or questions that you all might have. I just want to take a break and see if anyone in the chat had any questions or wanted to go back with anything in terms of a literacy moment or something they didn't understand. We can also hold questions for the Q&A at the end if you don't have any at this moment. All right, great. Thank you, Shiba, for adding that. So I can kick it over to Drew to discuss remote interviews.
Great, thank you, Emily. So in Emily's portion of the presentation, we talked about some ways to make sure that you have an intentionally diverse sample that includes extreme users when you're doing design research. So once we've planned who to interview, the next step is to engage those users and facilitate the conversations. So in this next section, we'll provide some tips, tools, and mindsets that you can use when you're conducting engagement. Given the current situation related to COVID-19 response, we'll focus on strategies to use for remote engagement, including interviews and focus groups that can be conducted over the phone or video conference. So if we move to the next slide, the ladder on the right side of the slide should look familiar to those of y'all in the design group. The latter presents an overview of the different methods that we propose for gathering information on user experience. The left side of the ladder denotes engagement methods, where we gather information based on what people say, and the right side based on observing what people do. Given the current situation, we're restricted in the ways that we can observe what people do. So we'll focus the conversation today on tips for the focus groups and interviews method, highlighted in light blue on the bottom left of the ladder. The goal in all qualitative research is to establish the most in-depth human connection possible. In a remote setting, such as a phone interview, that can present extra obstacles. So we have 3 remote interview tips for you on the left-hand side of the slide that are especially important when you're in remote settings to establish this kind of human connection. Keep in mind that many times in community engagement, including interviews and remote engagement strategies, it can be seen as an extractive process. If you look at the bottom of the ladder, some of these engagement strategies can be seen as in the neglect or denigration category. We hope that these tips presented on the left-hand side of the slide will help you conduct interviews that provide value to the people being interviewed and not just to you, the person that's gathering information. So a quick overview of the 3 tips that we're discussing today. Number 1 is providing compensation and support for the people that are being interviewed. Basically talking about how we can lower barriers for users to engage with you in the facilitation space. Number 2 is some guided reflection strategies and mindsets that you can use to be a detective and get the most out of remote interviews. And finally, number 3 is a timeline exercise that you can use to visualize the workforce development journey with participants in an active way during remote interview engagement. So if we jump to the first tip, as we discussed earlier in the presentation, we want to engage extreme users when we're doing research. So by offering compensation and childcare, you can lower the barriers to engaging with these users and make sure that they are able to participate in the engagement space. On the flip side, not fairly compensating users for time could lower participation from people with greater needs and bias your research. Again, the goal is to establish a human connection and build a relationship. So fair compensation increases your chances that you can pick up the phone at a later time and call to collect some more info. When you're considering how much to compensate participants for engagement, remember that the amount should be fair and compelling and enough value for a few different considerations. 1, for the number of hours participants are spending to share their information. 2, the value of participants' information. Users are really the experts in the problems that they're experiencing, so their information should be valued as such. And 3, the sensitivity of topics participants will discuss, or the amount of emotional labor it will require to discuss those topics. Keep in mind that it can take a while to get permissions from your organization, especially within the government context, to provide reimbursement for participant engagement. So even if you're going to engage participants at a later date, you might want to get the ball rolling and start getting through the necessary approval processes early on. In addition to compensation, we also encourage you to think about what other supports you could provide participants to lower barriers to engagement. Typical one that we come across in this work is childcare. In normal times, we would ask that you consider childcare subsidies or reimbursement. Now, given the remote work settings in light of COVID-19 safe in place, you might need to give participants breaks in sessions or provide permission at the beginning of the session so that people can go and take care of their family's needs. So before we move on to tip number 2, we're going to test out the poll feature in Zoom. So wish us luck. Going to ask everybody on the call to enter an answer to the following question. How much money would you give for a 1-hour phone conversation with an access seeker to discuss why she did not complete the job program? Before you answer the question, keep in mind that there can be a number of different reasons why she did not complete the job program. It could be the relationship with the caseworker, it could be a exacerbated mental health condition, a transportation issue, and there's different emotional burdens associated with each reason. So go ahead and enter your answer. And Emily, I believe you might have to help me out with the poll results.
Looks like we have a little more than half of folks voting, about 70%. So I'll leave it open just for another minute to give people some time.
Sounds great.
All right, about 30 more seconds for folks to finish up the poll, and then I'll end it and share the results. Oh, and we have a question.
It's good. We can finish up the poll and then we can come back to this one.
Awesome.
That's a great question.
All right, so Drew, are you able to see the shared poll results?
I am. It looks like the winner, if you will, 47% of respondents answered $16 to $30. We had at the lower end 19% answer 0 to 15, and then at the upper end 6% answer 51 to 75. Great, thanks for responding. Just a note, we were talking to the LA team the other day. I would believe it was the LA team, and they are considering providing about $50 to $70 $50 to $75 per engagement with participants, which we thought was a good number considering the population that they're trying to engage. So just wanted to share one of the tactics that one of the design group teams is moving forward with.
Yeah, and just to clarify, I think they're still deciding how much to offer for community engagement, but one of the organizations said that in the past. They usually offer 50 to 75 when asking their participants to give more information and really engage with them on their experience in the program or in civic engagement. So that was good context that the team is going to continue to use as they develop their own logistics.
And Sheebs, would you prefer to answer the question in the chat during this session or save it for the Q&A?
Yeah, we can answer that now. I think that's a really great question. If you're recognizing that most of the people that you want to reach out to are extreme users because they have trouble paying their phone bill, and I just realized some people can't see the question. The question that we were given is if all of our extreme users, or at least most of them, don't have contact information, what should we do? What would be the next step? How do we look at the next level of extreme population? We might not have 100% of folks with no contact information, but it could be a reality, especially with reentry folks that are disconnected and trying to reestablish their primary residence. In that case, I would say that the practice of using a data set to develop a subset that you would want to talk to is perhaps not as useful if you have really the majority of your population you don't have contact information for. And so I'd actually suggest that you pay more attention to other methods, such as using a snowball method where you can get in touch with some people that you know are part of that population, either because you have access to them or because you have partners who have access to them. And then asking them to help you to get in touch with other people that are perhaps more disconnected, people that they know are having struggles or experiencing sort of similar problems, and they might be able to help you figure out how to get in touch with that person or where you could meet them to have a conversation.
Great. Thank you, Sheba.
Yeah, great question.
Yeah, fantastic question. So we'll go ahead and move on to the second tip for remote interviews.
And I also just wanted to say, I know we're going back and forth in the chat box. We want to make sure you see everything in there. So we received a note that 50 to 75%, or $50 to $75. I think this is Monique Perez, believes that will help to get more participants to engage. So something to think about, that as you up that number, you could have more people, and especially, as Drew said, more people who are experiencing extreme barriers that are that answer the call and actually hold an interview with you.
Thanks, Jeeps.
Yeah, thanks, Drew.
Yeah, so unless there are other chats, it looks like we're good. I think we'll go ahead and move on to our second tip for remote interviews. So the second tip is a framework that you can use to guide your conversations through different lenses towards the user experience. It's called the ORI facilitation framework. It actually originates from the ORID framework, ORID, but we removed the D for decide from the framework because just as a reminder, we're staying within the problem space now. We're not trying to jump to immediate solutions. So this ORI framework provides 3 different categories of questions that you can use to be a detective and learn more about the user experience. Some may be more or less familiar to you and to the user that you're talking to, but all are valid and can help you triangulate on the user's unique experience. So O stands for objective, asking about what the user experienced or observed. R is for reflective, asking questions that get to the heart of what users were feeling when going through an experience. So questions like, how did you feel about this? When have you felt accomplished when going after that goal? And then I is interpretive questions. So helping users connect dots and form opinions about their experiences. So for example, what does this mean for your goals, for your family, and for your routine? Ahead of time, before engaging with users, it might be a useful exercise to think about different ways that you can phrase questions. And this ORI framework is a good way to think about rephrasing questions and trying to really dig deeper into the insights and unique experiences of the users that you're talking to. Keep in mind that even if you do prepare questions, you don't have to ask all of them. We've been telling design group members that this is really detective work. You're trying to follow leads and follow the path that will give you the most in-depth human connection to the experiences that the users are going through. All right, so we'll go ahead and move on to the third tip. Our final remote interviewing tip of the day is actually an exercise that you can use to learn more about access seekers' goals and their path towards achieving those goals. We also call this the steps to goals exercise. You may have heard that us refer to it as that before. In this exercise, you can ask the access seeker to get a pen and paper, and assuming access to pen and paper, and divide that paper into 3 unique sections, as you see on the slide above. So first, ask the access seeker to write their goals related to financial sustainability on the right-hand side of the paper. Encourage them to think holistically. So what are your goals for your family? Do you hope to move or to buy a house or a car? What opportunities do you hope that your children have related to financial sustainability? Second, go all the way to the opposite side of the paper and ask, what steps have you completed on your way to completing that goal? The steps that you've already completed in the past. And then finally, in the middle of the paper, ask the user to write down what steps they still need to complete. So that could be getting further education, completing a training program, or becoming an apprentice. We found that it's really helpful in the past when doing these kinds of exercises to have clients visualize their workforce development journey. So this timeline tool helps them map out this linear process and identify the problems and opportunities at each step along the way. Ideally, it would be great to have the client complete the timeline, snap a picture, and send it to you so that you can talk about what they've written down in real time. We know that that can pose challenges. So the alternative is that you can take notes as the clients are going through the process that will help you think about where you want to delve deeper with the client and visualize their journey. So once the timeline is complete, you can use this visual representation of the client's workforce development journey to ask some follow-up questions. So we've included some at the bottom, but really encourage you to think of your own. So some of them are thinking about the ORID framework or ORI framework from the slide below. An objective question might be, walk me through your experience completing these steps. A reflective question might be, how did you feel when completing this exercise? Or how did you feel when you were going through the job training program that you experienced last year? So again, your goal through this exercise is to be a detective and follow the leads that help you better understand the user's experience. This is just one tool or framework that we've had success with in the past that we hope will be helpful for your remote interview engagement as well. So in summary, we've discussed today 3 tips for remote engagement. One was compensation and support, including childcare. The second was the ORI facilitation framework to help you ask different kinds of questions to better understand the user's experience. And the third was the timeline or steps to goals exercise that we just finished discussing. Unless we have any questions, which we might have. I see one come in from Virginia. Oh, okay. Virginia Hamilton commented that the ORID framework referenced, thanks for going back to the slide, is fully covered in the book, The Art of Focused Conversation, and that's available on Amazon. Virginia says this can give you a lot of tips to design a conversation that will work and have a balance. Also had a question about the term access seeker. I believe that Fabs might have discussed this earlier on, but when we say access seeker, this is actually a term that came out of our Inland Empire Design Group conversations at our initial touch point, our launch meeting. We think it's a better way. A lot of times we use terms like client, job seeker, student to talk about the users, the people in the community that we're hoping to engage. We thought access seeker was a better way to describe that because sometimes people aren't necessarily currently clued in or involved in the system, don't have access to the systems through which they can develop themselves from a workforce development standpoint. So that's the term that we've been using instead of client or other terms. So unless there are any other questions, pausing for a moment, I will pass the mic to Laura to close out this portion of the webinar before our discussion time.
Awesome. Thank you, Drew. Start my video. Hey, everyone. My name is Laura. I know I'm going to be a new face for everyone because I wasn't at the first workshop, but I just joined the design group. I've been at Third Sector for a while, and I'm really excited to continue working and learning with you all. I know that we just threw a lot of information at you guys, and that it was a pretty content-packed 45 minutes. So just a reminder, we will have the slide deck that we can share out to you. You can go back and review sections that you might need a little more time. We will also have this recorded, and the webinar will be available early next week. So we're shooting for this to be available Monday or Tuesday, and we will definitely send you guys a link. You can go back and watch, rewatch sections, pause, and kind of work with the deck and look at the video again. So you'll definitely have that option. So we have an activity for you guys for the next couple of months before our summer learning community. And our ask is that you call at least one person and you practice this, one of the remote interviewing techniques. So it can be someone from your organization, can be a former participant, whoever you think you can get access to. And our request is that you think about throughout your process 1 to 3 surprising things that you're learning. So as you're going through your interview, you might come up with a couple of new insights that we didn't talk about today. And we'd love for you all to bring those insights back to our next learning community this summer, likely in July, and we'll definitely finalize the date and get that back to you all. But we really wanted to give this opportunity to everyone. It's something that the design group participants are also doing, and we think it's a great way to kind of put some of these concepts and theories into practice, and also to really generate some new insights. You know, we don't have all the answers, and I think collectively as a group there's a lot of great learning experiences that we can gather from each other. So that's our request for the next couple of months. And now I think we can open it up to questions that you might all have. I'm just gonna check our chat box right here. So in case folks don't know, there's a little chat icon in the middle of your screen, and if you're new to Zoom or if you're still figuring out Zoom, and then in the chat icon, you can click on that, and then you can type in a question to all panelists, and that will go to everyone at Third Sector, or you can type in a question to all panelists and attendees, and that will go to everyone on the line. So I'll give you a sec just to figure out where that is. All right. Okay, so we have a couple of questions. We have a question here. It is, how do you suggest we help individuals move along in a guided conversation if they haven't developed any insight on their situation? They might not have that much to say.
So I'd love to answer this one before I go off of record, but then we can go off of record because this one came in while we were still in the discussion. I think it's a great question related to our content today.
That sounds great.
Okay. So I'm curious to hear what other people have to say. But yeah, I think that this might be LaToya had hit on the reason why we feel it's important to have these tips and ideas in your back pocket when you're planning for discussions, because she said, how do you suggest we help individuals move along a guided conversation if they haven't developed any insight on their situation, so they may not have much to say? Um, so I think this is important to understand that when you're having a conversation with people, they have potentially been through many different programs, different training opportunities, different job search phases in their life. And it's helpful to have a understanding of what that job search, what their career pathway has been like so far. And that's why we found this timeline tool to be so useful. It helps you first set up an understanding of that pathway before you can narrow in and help them to reflect on what their experience has been like. So after that, some things that you can think about cluing in on in these follow-up questions are, what are the needs that you're starting to see and how they're explaining this timeline to you? So are there steps they wish they had taken, like it says here, or things that seem to have gotten in the way of the goals that they had? What were the influences that seem to have happened here in the career pathway? What are there people or the step with the 4 steps, are there people that have been helpful to them throughout their career journey? What sort of touch points seem to have come in here? So that helps you to understand the lay of the land before you you get really deep into the other questions. Someone had asked, is it possible to show the screen with the 4 steps as a recap? Can you remind me, when you say 4 steps, are you thinking of this ORI facilitation?
I'm wondering if this is referring to our SEEK 4-step process. So if you want to just type that into the chat box, we can definitely take you back to that slide. Awesome. Okay, that's a yes. So I think that's at the beginning.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, so so just to close out on that, I think it's helping the person that you're speaking to reflect on their experience. And it's important to keep in mind, like Latoya asked, that this person might not have really had that time to process their experience before and to share it in a linear way. So these tips are to sort of help them to do that in, so that you can get information that is clear and useful for you.
Perfect. And then I think just to add on the 4-step process. So again, this is one of the frameworks that we use. It might be a different one that you're used to from seeing from human-centered design, but you can see just on that little left gray bar, this is the timeline that we're following in the curriculum. And then you can see with the colored boxes, that's kind of how we're flowing through the timeline. Okay, cool. We got a good chunk of questions. Okay, let me try to get to this. Folks with TBI, oftentimes undiagnosed, will not be able to track their experience or recall their history. And I think the question to that might be, do we have any tips for folks who might not be able to retrack their history or give all of the information that we're requesting of them? If I have understood that question wrong, feel free to chat it to the box, but I'm going to open that up to my team.
Yeah, so this is asking, I guess, for TBI, traumatic brain injury. I think that's true. There could be so many different reasons why they're having trouble laying this out. And typically we've done that timeline exercise using Post-its where they could put it onto a wall, put Post-its onto a wall in the order of steps that they have done. And it's very helpful then for people to look back over the steps, move them around, and have that visual cue. I'm not sure if anyone in the chat or any of the other panelists here have any ideas on how to work with people who have trouble recalling experiences.
Okay, and then if you guys do come up, if you're struggling with the chat box at all and you do have some extra resources, you can always email them to us later and we can definitely pass those on. So at the end of that question. I see that we're getting closer to 11. I'm going to take one more question while we have this on record, and then we'll turn off the record and have another 30 minutes for anyone else who wants to ask questions. We got one a little bit earlier about the matrix. So if you guys remember, we showed you that matrix that had 30 people per box. So the question is, can you give some more examples on how to develop this matrix? And do we really need to have 30 people per box? So we just go back to that slide. Okay, perfect. This is the one with the subset matrix. Do you want to take this one, Chiba, or do you want me to take this one?
Yeah, or Emily.
Yeah.
Emily?
Thanks, Kim, for the question. So yeah, I think the question of do we need to have 30 people per box? Absolutely not. This is just our example. I think the idea is that you want to have a much larger number. So when we say we want to talk to 30 people, you have to have a list of 120. And that's because we are imagining that it's going to be really hard to contact everyone and then not everyone's going to want to participate. So the idea is that the list just has to be much larger than you want. And then the 30 people, we just made that up. They doesn't have to be perfectly equal. This could be 10 people from Antelope Valley and 20 people from South LA, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is to have a big enough of a list where you can start to know that you can get a certain amount of people per category. And that's also when we were talking about adding more criteria. So if you wanted to add race, it would just make those boxes even smaller and you'd need even more people to get that representative number. And Shiba's also our local expert on this. Shiba, did I miss anything on that?
Yep, you said that perfectly.
Right. Kim, did that answer your question? Will you just chat it to us? Or are there any other questions when it comes to the matrix? Thanks, Kim. Awesome.